Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we're going to talk a lot about the New Orleans Saints. We got two great beat writers to do it for you. Evan Woodbery of NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, and Joel Erickson of The Advocate. And buckle up, because we're talking a lot of Saints tonight. And, of course, we'll start taking your phone calls at the half-hour mark of the program. Guys, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us. And we always start off kind of letting the audience know a little bit about what you're involved in. Joel, welcome to the show. Your first time here. Let the audience know a little bit about you and, of course, what you're doing with The Advocate.
I appreciate you having me on, Eric. You cover the Saints for The Advocate, work alongside Nick Underhill with the beat guys that handle the team, and you know, basically just covering the team on a daily basis.
And again, Evan, welcome back. And tell us about NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, and, of course, your duties there as well.
Yeah, we've covered with a large team at NOLA.com/Saints. You can find our coverage. You can find me on Twitter at the Saints Beat. And I think the last time, or maybe the first time I was on here, I was kind of brand new here, but you know, I've got my feet wet a little bit, and I've had a great time here in New Orleans.
Well, hopefully both of you guys stick around for a while and enjoy the city. We were just talking a little bit before the show. Great weekend to get out and enjoy New Orleans with the French Quarter Fest and everything that the city has to offer. Of course, you guys, one weekend of Jazz Fest, you'll be available. The next weekend, you'll be working because everybody's going to be tuned in looking at what's going on with the draft, and we'll get into that tonight. The preseason schedule's been announced. The Saints will be on the road for the first 2 weeks at New England, at Houston. They come home to take on Pittsburgh and Baltimore. From what I understand, the reason for that, Joel, is they're still working on the school board and the lighting system up there. What does that mean in your opinion in terms of what's going to happen with the Greenbrier? There was a lot of talk about hoping that the team would come back maybe a little bit early this year. I think there's maybe kind of a built-in excuse now for them to kind of stay up there for at least for the first few weeks of the preseason, at least the first 2 weeks of the preseason.
Well, I don't know how much the preseason games played into the Greenbrier or not. From what we know, they're going back up to the Greenbrier. I think my big takeaway from the preseason schedule was that the Saints clearly have teams that they like to play with. It's just three of the same teams, three of the same four teams that they played in the preseason last year. So you kind of get used to them. And as far as them going on the road twice, there's a couple teams around the league doing that, just giving themselves a little extra time for renovation. So they're going on the road for their first two.
Right. Evan, your take.
Well, I'm wondering if we'll see maybe some practices, joint practices. Last year, they joint practiced with the New England Patriots. Previously, they were going to have a joint practice with the Houston Texans, but that got canceled, possibly because the Texans were doing the special show that Sean Payton didn't want to have any part of. So that could be something to watch. With their joint practices, either with the Texans or the Patriots or both. That's something Sean Payton likes to do.
Guys, let's talk a little bit about the lack of a deal for Drew Brees to start this off. There's a lot of conjecture out there on why it has not gotten done. I've heard bad blood maybe between Condon and Loomis, that the Saints have really now put themselves under the cap because they've restructured other deals at this point, and it's not as pressing of a need. Joe, what's your take on this? I think a lot of us expect this to be done before free agency, freeing up some money for the Saints to be able to utilize during the free agency period. That didn't materialize. But I think a lot of fans are kind of on the edge of their seats right now. They like to see this deal done as quickly as possible, maybe to give the Saints a little bit more room under the cap as we start to see more of the June 1st cuts that'll be coming down. Play after the draft, veteran guys start to get released because the rookies have come in. They're making a little bit too much money, and there may be a pool of players out there that the Saints may be able to tap into, especially when you look at the wide receiver position and the guard position. Your thoughts?
Well, I think to some degree, a lot of those signings that happen after June 1st in the summer are signings that don't end up being for a ton of money.
Right.
They don't end up being the kind of thing that you'd need a huge amount of money for. Really, now that we've moved past the initial wave of free agency, when most of the really expensive contracts come, there's a little bit less pressure on that contract, honestly, because I mean, you can extend him and open up, however many $1 million, but really the signings that are going to be coming from now on are generally of the cheaper variety. There's not going to be a lot of big contracts that you see anywhere in the NFL from now going on.
Right. Saints about $3 million under the cap right now, the last calculations?
About 3.5.
Yeah. How do you see this playing out, Evan?
Well, I think it's interesting. The conventional wisdom definitely was that they were going to get something done before going into free agency. But as Joel said, the urgency now that was there is no longer there, because there's probably not going to need to get any more money the rest of the way through. The only urgency, I think, is just that you want Drew Brees to be your quarterback of the future, and there's no backup plan. So I think that's the interesting thing, is that you've got two negotiators that are really tough, Mickey Loomis and Drew Brees. Their history is that they are both going to fight for every last dollar. The last time we did this, it went down to the wire, and they both fought for every last dollar. So I think we can expect the same thing. The question is, if this drags on, if this continues to go on and lingers into 2017, well, if the Saints don't have a backup plan, their leverage is going down while Drew Brees' leverage is going up as this gets out. Now, if the Saints do come up with some sort of backup plan, and I don't know how they're going to do it unless short of drafting a quarterback, then maybe that changes. But right now, as far as the leverage goes, the ball is in Drew Brees' court. He has kind of the say-so. The only thing that could change that would be just a dramatic bad season for him in 2017 that drastically alters his market value. But right now, his market value, if he went on the market as a true free agent, would be astronomical.
And I'll stay with you for a moment. It's interesting because you want a fair deal for both, obviously. When you look at Brees' age, inevitably he's going to have a decline in his skill set. There's no doubt about that. You're rolling the dice if you're the Saints. I mean, how do you pin the year in which that you may see a decline in Drew Brees? He's been relatively healthy. He's bounced back from injuries. He keeps himself in great shape. He played at a very, very high level last year, so there's been no drop-off in terms of his skill set. So, I mean, this is a tough contract. This really is a tough contract, because if you're the Saints, you don't want to backload this deal, because, again, when he gets into the latter years of the deal, you don't want to be in a situation where you got a declining player and you have to eat a lot of money down the line to be able to free yourself from him.
You don't want to be in that situation, but that would seem like something the Saints would do, given their philosophy of always kind of putting it on the credit card, so to speak, pushing some of that money back. So if there is a Drew Brees extension, I could see there being kind of phantom years at the back of that contract. In other words, maybe he's signed through the age of 42 when the Saints have no thought that he could actually play through 42. He either retires or is cut or something. But those phantom years are there to kind of push the salary cap burden down the road a little bit. And, is that dangerous? Yes, but the Saints have been playing with that game for a while, some would argue fairly successfully. So I don't know necessarily that they wouldn't do that again in the future.
Right, a la Nick Fairley, what they did with Nick Fairley this year, where they got some phantom years on the deal in order to make it fit under the cap. Great point. Nick, I'm sorry. Joel, your thoughts on that?
The hardest part, I think, for the Saints is you've got, when you have an aging quarterback, what they've done previously and what their seasons have been previously isn't really a great future indicator of when they're going to fall off. If you look at a lot of the great quarterbacks' history, some of these guys had great years really late, 38, 39, 40, and then the next year was just the year that they got serious injury, the bottom dropped out. You think about Brett Favre. Brett Favre had 33 touchdowns and 7 interceptions one year, and the next year he's done.
Right.
And it's really a lot of guys like that. Peyton Manning, 39 and 15, and then this year, injured, and he got away with a Super Bowl, but he wasn't the same player. So the hard part for the Saints is, yes, Brees has looked very, very healthy. He's been good, but how do you know when that injury or that year is going to come? And
that's, I think, the hardest part of this contract. And, because you don't want to get in a situation where you're saddled with a player whose skills have diminished, where they're basically holding a clipboard for you. I know that Brees doesn't want to end his career being a bench warmer. I mean, much like Favre wants to be out there and playing. But then there are some other effects to this down the line. You've got some other signings that you're going to have to look at. That's why I think it's kind of imperative to try to get this thing done at least before the end of the season, for sure. With Armstead and Unger coming up, you want to make sure that you have money under the cap there. And do you really want to take a chance on going with a third franchise tag on Drew Brees and the ramifications of that?
They really can't do a franchise tag because they've done it twice before. It would be $42 million.
Exactly.
It wouldn't be able to fit. The one thing is, though, provided that they don't add any more dead money to the next couple of years' caps, in theory, they might not have to backload this contract the way they've done some of the other ones. They've got some space. Granted, there's not a lot of people under contract right now, but there's maybe a chance for them to set up a contract more like the other quarterbacks around the league have gotten, where the cap hit is the same over a couple of different years of the span, as opposed to what they've done in the past, where it's a very small one in the beginning and then pushed out towards the back.
Your thoughts?
Well, and that's definitely true, because you look at Drew Brees has a $30 million cap hit, so he'll have a $30 million cap hit in 2016, and that money is, as of now, off the books for 2017. So they have that money, that room to play with. The other factor, and this is why the Saints have been effective in kind of pushing that money down the road, is that the cap keeps going up. It keeps rising each year, so there's no sign of that stopping. Revenues are pouring into the NFL through new TV money. You know, that is kind of the validation, if you will, of the credit card approach, is as long as the cap is rising.
And it has.
And it has been for the last few years, barring maybe a labor dispute or something, you can kind of assume that you're going to get an extra $5 to $10 million in space each year.
Guys, average per year, where do you think he is in this next contract that's going to come up?
I think with every quarterback now, I think it starts at 20. Obviously, with his age, you'd like for it to be able to come down more. I know some people look at the contracts that Tom Brady signs in New England, but Tom Brady's kind of a unique case in that his wife makes way more than he does.
Sure.
So, but $20 million a year is sort of the benchmark and the starting point for all quarterbacks. Now, I'm assuming Breeze wants more than that, especially with what some guys who are lesser players have gotten. But then you have to factor in that some of those players are a lot younger than he is.
Evan, what's your thoughts?
I would agree with Joel that the negotiations probably start at $20 million, or that Drew Brees would not discuss anything less than $20 million, which is what he's being paid right now. Just keeping in mind that he signed that original contract 5 years ago. The market for quarterbacks has expanded greatly since then. The salary cap has gone up greatly since then. So even if you're just doing normal inflation, his projected salary would already go up. So I think $20 million is the starting point. You know, maybe it ends at about 25 or so. But at the end of the day, you know, within the context of a $160 million salary cap, if you're just debating $1 million here or $1 million there, it's really not that big a deal when you're talking about a franchise quarterback. So that's why I think at the end of the day, if they both want to get it done, it can get done.
Yeah. Guys, what do you look at when you look at what was happening right now in the last couple of days? Saints interviewing Paxton Lynch from Memphis. They're taking a look at Connor Cook from Michigan State, Nate Sudfeld of Indiana. And Evan, I'll take you first on this. Is this what's your read into this? Is this a due diligence? Is this about making sure that you know, it's the draft, you want to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row there? Is it about misinformation for other teams that think that the Saints may be looking at a quarterback? Or is it real interest in one of these players, considering Garrett Grayson was a high draft pick last year?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably, I would say it's most similar to what they did last year, which is taking a look at all the quarterbacks. Part of that is just to know who you're going to be facing in the league down the road. They took a look at Jameis Winston. They talked to him. You know, some of that's just healthy to have that knowledge of the league, to know who the quarterbacks of the future are going to be, so to speak, in your league. But I think part of it is doing your due diligence so that if a guy does fall to you in a position you feel like picking, which is what happened with Garrett Grayson, they felt his value was a good fit for where he landed, then maybe you talk about drafting him. I think the only question that we don't know is, would the Saints, if Goff or Wentz was available at number 12, would they pull the trigger? And I don't know the answer to that. I think that would be the real question that would be normal. That would be different than a normal year where they just look at everybody and see if they maybe get a late round bargain or a mid round bargain. That would be a big difference this year.
Joel?
Well, I think when you have a quarterback that's the same age, that's the age of Breeze now, you kind of always have to be on the lookout for somebody special. You can't just, you know, take one and if you think you've got the right quarterback, you've got to take him. So you got to do some of that. But obviously, they're not necessarily thinking about, we have to take a quarterback high, because Nate Sudfeld's in there in that list, and he's not a guy who's been projected to be that high. So they're looking at it. And the other thing to remember is some of these visits and stuff, they've talked to a lot of these guys twice, even before the workouts and visits started. You know, there's been guys in several of the last couple drafts that the Saints talked to at the Senior Bowl, and then talked to at the Combine, and then didn't have any contact with. So it's hard to get a read just off of visits what level of interest that might be. They draft guys that come in for visits, and they draft guys who they haven't talked to since February.
Evan, do you get a feel for how they feel about Garrett Grayson at this point? Are they happy with his progress? At this point, they brought in veteran guys to back up Drew Brees. They don't feel comfortable enough, at least last season as a rookie, to be able to have him in that position. Is this going to be a situation where maybe we see him rise to the backup this year, or is this maybe another year where he's even a red shirt as a third quarterback once again?
Well, I thought it was interesting, and some people disagree with me, but I thought it was interesting that Luke McCown got a 2-year contract with a $500,000 signing bonus, given that the last 3 years he'd been on a strict minimum contract. Now, that doesn't guarantee him a job by any means. I mean, $500,000, they could, within the context of the cap, it's not that big a deal. But it means that basically, if they're going to give up on Garrett Grayson, the cost would be roughly the same as if they cut Luke McCown. It'd be roughly the same financial loss. So they've created a scenario where I think at least you have to go in thinking that Luke McCown is the number 2 to start. Now, he could still be beaten out.
Right.
They could still, decide to make a change. But I think you have to at least go into camp thinking him as number 2. Is that an indication that they're disappointed in Garrett Grayson, or is that just being ultra conservative, ultra cautious? Hey, there's this known commodity that we know in McCown. Let's stick with him. I don't know. It's tough to say unless you're in the quarterback room and kind of know their internal thinking. But off the top of my head, I would say in a perfect world, if you like the quarterback that you got in the 3rd round, you'd like to have him as a backup quarterback in year 2. I don't think that's
Especially with the
unreasonable.
needs that they had last year. That was really a shocker going
Yeah.
after a quarterback in the 3rd round when you had the defensive needs that the Saints had.
Yeah, and that's why I think, it doesn't necessarily mean that Garrett Grayson's career is over or that they hate him or anything like that. But in a perfect world, would you like him to be the backup quarterback in year 2? I think absolutely.
What could you add, Joel?
I don't really think we have a good idea of what the Saints think of Garrett Grayson, and there's a chance that the Saints might not be completely sure yet. I mean, they obviously have training camp last year, but third quarterbacks don't really do a ton during the regular season. So this first offseason, the offseason works that's about to start here in the next week, and everything through this summer, and then into training camp next year, then they're going to get a better look at how he's grown, how he's different from training camp last year. And guessing, it's just hard to guess.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk to people about, and I'm not saying by any means that Grayson is Aaron Rodgers, but people in Green Bay after the first year of Aaron Rodgers there were thinking, okay, they don't know if that pick worked out.
Right.
Because of the same thing. He had to sit and wait and everything else. And then you get into the offseason, it changes things. So bringing in McCown or re-signing McCown gives you an option in case he doesn't develop, because there's not really a way that they would have a great indicator up till now of how he's developed, just because you don't get snaps in practice if you're a third quarterback.
Where does Matt Flynn fit in all this, do you think?
As of now, I think probably does not fit in. I mean, they may go to camp. In fact, they probably will go to camp with 4 quarterbacks, so they may add a 4th quarterback. But I think it's when you're doing it that way, you've got the veteran in McCown, you've got the guy who's going to compete against McCown, and now you just need kind of a 4th, maybe an undrafted free agent. 2 years ago, they had Logan Kilgore, who was kind of a little-known undrafted free agent from Middle Tennessee. So maybe someone fitting that profile who's probably just there to be kind of a camp arm, so to speak, and then maybe if he thrills you, then you keep him on the practice squad or something, but not real high expectations for him.
Flynn?
I don't think – I can't see him. He was an emergency signing last year, and an emergency signing doesn't necessarily factor into the plans going forward. He didn't get in the game or have a chance to prove he deserved another audition.
2 of the big question marks in last year's draft, obviously, were Garrett Grayson and Andres Pete. The Saints looked to be in a position where they kind of got stuck with that pick. Maybe they wanted to go defense. There were some rumors out there. They were looking for defenders. They got taken off the board before them. Pete was kind of there. There was a relationship between, obviously, Peyton and the family. He's known Pete since he was a kid, followed his career at Stanford. He couldn't beat out Zach Strief last year. I don't know if he's going to have the ability to beat out Zach Strief this year. I guess the question is, where is his future, at least his immediate future? Is it at right tackle? Will they try him again at guard, especially with the unknown at the guard position? Evan, what do you see happening with Andres Pete?
Well, my sense last year was that Sean Payton was never really smitten with the idea of Andres Pete as a guard. That in some ways that seemed to be, kind of a product of the situation that they had to make a change or that they wanted to take a look at that point in the season. But I'm not sure that Sean Payton was ever smitten with that. In fact, every time he's asked about it, he seems to emphasize that he likes Andres Pete as a tackle. So I think he'll have a fair, firm fight with Zach Strief. I think he may very well beat out Zach Strief in camp in August. And then I think, people always ask, when is Zach Strief going to be forced to take a pay cut? There's really not much to cut with him. He doesn't make that much money. Right. And to have a backup tackle like that would be a luxury. To have if you look at some of the injuries that the Saints have had at that position over the last few years, to have a veteran, respected, well-known, reliable backup tackle like Zach Strief, I think is more than worth what he's paid. So I think there'll be a battle at that position. I think Andrew Peat could very well win, and the guard is probably going to be resolved with Senio Kelemeti, Tim Lolito, and then perhaps both a free agent to be signed, maybe like a late addition like a Jonathan Goodwin of a couple of years ago. Right. And then also maybe a draft pick. I think that could be a real big battle there.
Yeah, no doubt. Joel, your thoughts on Pete, where he ultimately ends up, and then if you would kind of morph in like Evan did with the guard position.
He's clearly more comfortable at tackle. When we saw him play tackle last year, he got a game and a part of a drive before he got hurt against Atlanta at left tackle, and then he played the last game at right tackle. He's clearly more comfortable there. He showed some signs there of being able to, when he can actually play tackle, of being able to look pretty good there. So I agree. I think it's going to be a battle between him and Strief, and the same thing Evan said. If 2 years ago what the Saints went through, having some issues with Bryce Harris coming in and filling in for someone, if you can have somebody like Strief there, not only say Pete beats him out, not only is Strief there in case of injury, but Strief's also there to sit in the meeting room with him and sit in the film room and go, okay, I went against that guy for years, he does this, that kind of thing, kind of help out. And do that with the whole line, really, not just with him. The guard position, I think that Sean Payton said at the owners' meetings that they wanted to get a guard in free agency, and if they wanted to get a guard in free agency, that means it's on somewhere on their list of must, needs, and wants. And you'd assume that they're probably going to end up trying to get one in the draft. They've taken some very close looks at some of them. I don't know if this is just peculiar to Dan Rochar, the new offensive line coach, or if this is how he does things. But at the Senior Bowl, he was right there on the field with the guards through a lot of the practices. So I think they're probably going to try to add a young player there, and if not, there's always a veteran available somewhere.
Guys, in the past, the Saints haven't jumped in and tried to re-sign players way well ahead of the contracts expiring. But you got two anchors on this line now in Armstead and Unger. The Saints have had cap problems, but do you envision them trying to get them under contract before the end of this season, or do you think that they're going to go into negotiations next year?
Well, Unger was another guy where you looked at as a potential salary cap move, where if you could extend him, you could reduce his base salary, which is about, I think, $4.5 million or so. You could reduce that by extending his contract and pushing some of that into a signing bonus. The fact that it didn't happen tells me that they didn't get to that point, or that perhaps Max Unger wants to test free agency. I mean, you look at, I think, especially compared to a year or two ago, the market was really strong for players this year, and I think a lot of players are saying that and saying, maybe I should wait just to see what happens. And certainly a guy like Unger and also a guy like Teron Armstead have to think, I could be playing for a mega contract. Maybe I should wait and see and not just go for security, which so many players, because of the uncertainty of free agency, will go for the security of sticking with their home club. Those are two well-respected guys, and you wonder if they don't actually want to test free agency versus signing something early. And
one of the questions will be, I don't think either one, depending on what's going to happen with Drew Brees, are going to get just a free pass here. Especially when you look at Armstead, there's a good chance that he's going to be franchise tagged before it's all said and done. But what's your take on those two players who, honestly, when you look at the offensive line, the two best players on the offensive line, and two players that will be attractive to other clubs as well? I think I said it all last year, but I think Armstead is right on the cusp of being an elite left tackle. People forget that as good as he was last year, he's playing on one leg for most of the season. True. But I could also see them extending him what they did with Cam Jordan last year, where randomly in the middle of the summer he gets an extension that doesn't necessarily change his cap figure that year, but they give him the big money starting the next year because they have the room to do that. I think Armstead's a guy. This is just my opinion. I don't know what the Saints think, but Armstead's a guy that you want to lock up. Yes. Just given his age, his athleticism, what he's shown so far.
Unger's a little bit more of a difficult thing just because he's in his 30s now.
Right.
So he played well enough to deserve the extension, and you could see them making that move. But do you want to push it, 3-4 years down the line? Do you want to give him a long-term extension? Do you want it to be a little bit shorter? And maybe, as Evan said, he would like to have a longer one, and so they're going back and forth on that. But if it was up to me, I'd be trying to re-sign Armstead before he hits even to the franchise tag point.
And guys, let's face it, when you look at the way this offensive line blocks, it's inside out. You've got to be strong at the point of attack when it comes to the center and guards. Right now, you really don't have to worry about the center position like you do have to worry about the guard position. And Unger obviously a big part of the Jimmy Graham deal. And right now, it's paid off for the Saints. I mean, when you look at the Jimmy Graham, and we obviously with the injuries, now bringing in Kobe Flynn, and we'll talk about him in a few minutes. But it was worked out to be a pretty good deal for the Saints in bringing in Max Unger, who's anchored that offensive line.
Yeah, I absolutely think so, and that's not meant as a criticism of Jimmy Graham at all, who I like a lot. But you look at the relative ease with which the Saints replaced his production in the offense. Ben Watson had a career year. I mean, that goes to the notion that maybe for piece parts like that, the offense is so dynamic that you can plug in a player that you like and see him get that similar production. So, yeah, I mean, basically for the Saints, it was Jimmy Graham for Max Unger and Stephon Anthony, which is what they ended up using that pick for. And I'd say that's a pretty decent trade at this point.
Your thoughts on that trade?
You'd be hard pressed. You still see every once in a while some of the national guys say something about the Saints losing Jimmy Graham, but really, with what they got back for it and what the offense did last year, the passing game was still right at the top of the NFL. Brees still led the league in passing yards, and you got two very good pieces. So it's hard to look at that trade and think that the Saints did anything but come out on top.
And Seattle did okay as well. They came up well. The receiver and what they got with the Saints pick as well. The guy slips my memory at this point, but I thought that was one of the deals where both teams really came out well. Honestly.
Yeah, and I still, the Jimmy Graham is a question mark as far as his health,
right.
But I still think when healthy, he can be a top level, one of the most exciting players in the league. It's just a question. He's been banged up the last couple of years, and I think there are a lot of question marks about him going into 2016.
He probably had an adjustment too, just because most of what Russell Wilson does is more improvisational.
Yes.
There's a lot more moving around the pocket and doing stuff that's not necessarily the timing stuff that Brees throws.
Joel, your thoughts on the wide receiver position? Right now, Cook, Snead, Coleman are returning. They got a bunch of guys they brought in that had been in camp with them. Some are saying that they really need to go with a high draft choice at the wide receiver position. We'll get into the draft in a few minutes, but I'm not in that camp. I really think the defense is the real need here. But when you look at just the names that are out there right now, despite the fact that, again, if you can run a precise route and you catch the football, you can play in this offense with Drew Brees. Is the wide receiver position a concern for you going into training camp?
Not as much as it is for some other people. I mean, I think Brandon Cooks maybe doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. He really ended up having a really good year last year. Willie Snead was very reliable in a number 2 role. Brandon Coleman had some mishaps, but also showed that in the last couple games he had 9 catches. And the other thing, as you kind of alluded to, the Saints offense has a history of getting very productive receivers out of places like, undrafted players, 7th round picks, lower round picks. So it'd be hard for me, knowing that they have that history and that ability to find guys, to necessarily throw everything in on a wide receiver when you have so many needs on the defensive side of the ball.
It was out of character for them to move up to take Cooks a couple years ago.
I think that was a surprise at the time as well. I agree with Joel in that, at least for me, about a month ago, I would have considered it ludicrous if they go after a receiver. Now that they've filled some of those needs in free agency and they have fewer musts going into the draft, I wouldn't reject it out of hand if they got a guy they like at a spot they like. But I think you also say they've got 3 guys that they can put in right now, like you said, Snead, Cooks, Coleman. They really only used 4 receivers last year, so bring in a bunch of guys, they already have some. Bring in 8 or 10 guys and have them compete for that last spot. and maybe you get a Willie Snead Part 2 this year.
And Fleener is kind of a wild card in this as well, isn't he? Because he's a guy that's going to take Jimmy Graham, Ben Watson's place, but he's also going to run the same type of route tree that we've seen Marcus Colston run in the past as well.
Yeah, he's going to work over the middle, and the other thing he can do, and Ben did some of this. Ben Watson did push down the field some, but Ben wasn't as fast as Fleener is. Fleener, I think, ran just over a 4.5 at the combine, and he can really stretch the field in ways probably similar to what Graham did. But that's the other thing. If you're looking at it as we've just got the wide receivers and the tight end isn't necessarily as big a part of the offense, then maybe receivers a bigger need. But when you have that guy that you know they're going to highlight in the offense and could go, I mean, Ben Watson had 74 catches last year. That's a position that takes a little bit of pressure off the rest.
Your thoughts on Fleener and his role with this team?
I mean, I'm of two minds about that. One, I think they probably did overpay, and I kind of wonder who they were competing against when they signed that big deal. On the other hand, it was 5 years, $36 million, but as I wrote it, you could really also look at it as a 2-year, I think $14 or $15 million contract with 3 options at the end, which is basically what it is. So it's not outrageous money. I still think it's probably more than they needed to pay given their financial constraints at the time. But I think he's going to be very productive in this offense. And I think, I mean, if he isn't, that's a problem. The fact is they had Ben Watson, who was making just about, barely above league minimum, who had 75 catches and looked phenomenal. So, they brought him in to be a big part of this offense. I think he can be, and I think he should be.
Where does Josh Hill fit in all this at the tight end position? Interesting, they matched the contract with Chicago. Part of that contract is a no-trade clause, which I've said on this program, my radio show, is almost non-existent in the NFL right now. Your thoughts, Joel? Does he make that leap now? Again, Fleener more the receiving type tight end, where again, you look at Human and also Hill. Both guys obviously can block and catch the football.
Well, the Saints did a lot with 3 tight end formations last year. And the thing with Josh Hill is that he fills a role there as a move tight end and H-back type. And the Saints basically decided, it seems like to me, the Saints basically decided that role was worth enough to put relatively a small amount of money when you look at the overall cap in terms of his cap hit on that position. I don't know that we're ever going to see Josh Hill break out in the way that Ben Watson did last year. I think that obviously he had the best opportunity he could have had last year. But the Saints clearly value that spot in the offense, which is why they matched the Bears. What that means in terms of catches, that kind of thing, with Fleener present, it's hard to see him taking on a much bigger role than what he had.
Evan?
No, I agree with Joel completely, and I think this is probably, I was surprised they matched the offer sheet, but once the numbers came out, I was less surprised because I'm sure it was a deal where Sean Payton said to Mickey Loomis, I really like this guy. He's just a role player, but he's a great role player. We love him in the locker room. He's a good guy. He plays on every special teams. And they got the offer sheet from the Bears, and they saw his cap number would actually go down a tad with the Bears offer sheet versus the 1-year tender. Right. I think it went from like 1.67 to 1.5 or something. So they had the money allotted basically already. And this is a guy they like. Even if he is just a role player, I think he's a role player they love. And so they said, why not? Let's pull the trigger.
You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports each and every Thursday night right here on WLAE with our live broadcast, 6 o'clock. On Fridays, you can catch us 10 o'clock here on WLAE, also on Pelican Sports Television in the New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette markets, 9 o'clock on Friday. Evan Woodbery of the TimesPicayune.com, Joel Erickson of The Advocate are our guest. We'll be coming back going to the phone lines, 866-3200. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Don't go anywhere.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Brisby's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbysrestaurant.com. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Packers. Viking. Packers. Viking. Viking.
Red State, Blue State, Vegan.
Carnivore.
We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown.
Optimist.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full.
But when we live united, we create real, lasting change in the building blocks of life. The education, income, and health of our communities,
Live
our families,
united.
even the person next to us.
Live united.
Real change won't happen without you. So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up at liveunited.org.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Joel Erickson of The Advocate, Evan Woodbery of the TimesPicayune.com are our guests tonight. 866-3200 is the phone number. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Let's head to the phone line to Homa and Greg. Greg, welcome. You're on Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Greg.
Hey guys. I don't know if I got a question or a statement or I just need some advice, but it seems like like ESPN graded the New Orleans Saints a D for their free agent signings. But yet we kicked butt in 2009 when we went to the Super Bowl with all our free agent signings. So is it system? Is it playing? Is it the fact that we're not doing our homework this year and last year because we've been whiffing? And I just hang up and listen and see what you guys think.
Thank you, Greg. You know, I've said that they've kind of shopped at Big Lots this year because they just didn't have a lot of money. But I'm also on the record as saying that I thought they've done a nice job considering the amount of money that they have, considering the way they structured these deals. It's not like they're in a position where they're really going to be hurting if these players don't work out. I got to give Mickey Loomis a lot of credit up to this point. At least on paper, it looks like it could be an upgrade at those positions with these players. But again, cap-wise, they didn't hurt themselves.
I really wouldn't put any stock in the D+ or whatever that ESPN gave them. That, from my understanding, that's more of a reaction to what they thought the Saints needed, and they figured they spent too much money on tight ends. They decided, based off of that one signing, that the rest of it goes down. We don't any grade that happens for a player acquisition now really doesn't matter, whether it's the draft or free agency, just because the Saints have a different view of what their needs were. And like you said, I mean, they got pretty good bargains everywhere else. And it's hard to make an evaluation on what they've done on players who haven't played for the team yet.
Right.
Yeah, I think in the immediate aftermath of free agency, when it was basically the first few days when a lot of teams were making moves and the Saints did, Fleener and nobody else, I think a lot of people were scratching their heads. But I think you have to look at free agency as a whole, and in a certain extent it's still ongoing, and they could add a few more veterans between now and the start of training camp. But I think what they did more methodically, getting some cheap, relatively cheap veteran signings, they filled their needs. They took some needs off the board, or at least downgraded them a bit going into the draft so they can be a little bit more open about their draft. So I would give it at least an average grade as far as free agency. But like Joel said, ultimately we'll be able to grade it better next year. And a lot of people would have given him good grades for Brandon Browner and C.J. Spiller a year ago, and we all know how that turned out.
Yeah, no doubt. Herm is in New Orleans. Herm, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Herm.
Guys, I have a question about the Saints defensive line. The line that they let go, the interior defensive line players like Hakeem Hicks, Tyron Walker, they were pretty good players when they got contracts with the teams that they're with. Now in the defensive backfield, Abdul Caduce, Malcolm Jenkins, Patrick Robinson is still playing. Now, Greg Williams didn't have any problems with the defensive talent that he worked with. So was there a problem with these guys fitting into Rob Ryan's scheme?
Thank you for the phone call. Was it a scheme thing with these players not fitting with Rob Ryan, or was it talent?
Most of the ones he mentioned predate me a little bit. My understanding is that some of them were salary cap casualties, but I'm going to have to defer because I started last year.
Well, I mean, I think the $1 million question that nobody really has a good answer to, other than something we've debated over the last year, is how did Rob Ryan's defense in his first year with the Saints be something that we were all raving about and everybody was thrilled about, to the worst defense in the league next year and then the worst defense in the league again. I mean, without a dramatic changeover in personnel from the first year to the second. It really wasn't that dramatic. There were, a few pieces here and there, but that's the $1 million question, and that was what we debated at the end of the Rob Ryan era, and I don't think anybody has given a satisfactory answer yet, and I think maybe Sean Payton is still scratching his head about that also.
Guys, Nick Fairley, I'd like to get your take on Evan. What do you think of him as a player? As I mentioned, I like the way they structured the deal. They're not really invested in him. If he plays well, obviously he can parlay that into maybe move on to another team, or if If he plays to what everybody thought he was coming out of Auburn, he would be a great player for the Saints. And I've said it already. If you go look at the roster, the depth chart as it stands now, to me, Nick Fairley comes in as the second best player on that defensive line right now. A lot of college free agents, a lot of street free agents that the Saints brought in because of salary cap implications last year. You look at just a couple of draft choices in Davidson and Jenkins, and also Cam Jordan. Nick Fairley right now, and that's saying a lot considering, again, he's been kind of I don't want to say he's been a bust, but he's been an underachiever everywhere he's been. But it'll be interesting to see how this kind of works out. But it's low risk, could be high reward for the Saints.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly Nick Fairley's pedigree is probably the second best on the line to Cam Jordan, or similar to Cam Jordan as far as coming out of college, the expectations for him. I don't know, I'm somewhat hesitant to say that there's such a high upside on Fairley just because we've heard that before. As recently as last year when he signed with the Rams, I think it was like a 1 year, $4 or $5 million, and everybody's like, well, he can use this and parlay it to a bigger deal after the Rams, and he parlayed it into a smaller deal with the Saints. So I would agree that I would keep expectations reasonable, and if he exceeds them, phenomenal. You look at what the Saints have done at that position the last couple of years. They basically had Brandon Dedrick 2 years ago, who was the guy that kind of signed off the street at the minimum salary. Williams last year, who was a well-respected veteran, but clearly at the very tail end of his career. So it's not a position they've, at least in the recent past, invested a lot of money in. And to a certain extent, this is kind of fitting that profile. And if he can match or slightly exceed the production of Williams, then it's a victory.
Yeah. Your thoughts on Fairley?
I think that there's some that have sort of remember what he did at Auburn. I think more than what he's done in the NFL.
Yes.
Even his best years in the NFL were next to Ndamukong Suh, the best defensive tackle in the league. But that being said, when it's him versus 35-year-old Kevin Williams, that kind of thing, it's a good deal. I just don't necessarily know that you should be expecting him to come in and get 8 sacks because that's not something he's ever done.
I would agree with that. But as I mentioned, when you look at what they have, and you just look at maybe the pedigree of a Fairley, it's got to be just a little bit of an upgrade here.
Yeah, we honestly, we don't even know if Kevin Williams is going to play football again next year. And if he wasn't going to sign until July. So that was a position they had to address one way or another. And I think, given their financial constraints, I think they addressed it very satisfactorily. Yeah.
What about Laurinaitis at this point? I was a little down on that signing because went back. The analytics were out there. You saw a little decline. I had Mike DeTilio on this show a few weeks ago. He mentioned the injury to Robert Quinn in front of him, the elbow injury, obviously that kind of hurt him in terms of his play on the field with the Rams. But then I had a chance to watch him this weekend in week 4 of the NFL replay on NFL Network, and guys all over the field, coach on the field, everything you expected from Laurinaitis. The one thing the Saints didn't have last year, obviously, was a seasoned veteran at that middle linebacker position. To me, it kind of frees up some of these young players to be able to utilize their speed and athleticism. Again, not a bad deal when you look at it from a monetary standpoint, and there could be a tremendous upside, but you can't expect to get the guy that you saw 5 years ago with the Rams. But still a serviceable, probably a better player than what you have right now, and Stephon Anthony, who's still kind of swimming, trying to find his way as middle linebacker.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably hope that by moving Anthony over that you're going to get better production out of him. And we're all high on Stephon Anthony. I like him a lot, but when you are at the middle of the worst defense in football and playing every snap in the middle of the worst defense of football, you have to try something else. And that happened a couple of years ago with Curtis Lofton, who didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but he was at the middle of the worst defense in football, and you just need to try something else. So I think they're going with maybe what they thought they lacked a little bit, which is either leadership or the ability to make calls quickly and kind of process the defense quickly. They think they're getting an upgrade there, and they think maybe they'll get more out of Anthony if they move him to the strong side as well.
Your thoughts?
I think the elbow probably mattered more than most people realize. He said he couldn't, when we talked to him right after he got signed, he said he couldn't bend his arm at all. He couldn't use it to take on blocks. It's a big part of a middle linebacker's job, especially if you've got offensive linemen coming down on you that you have to get through. If you can't use your shoulder to get through all those things. So that's a big deal. He's always been durable before, and he still found a way to get 109 tackles. So at the price he paid, I think there's a chance that they might have gotten a steal, honestly, at the price that they got him for.
And look, they needed leadership. they definitely need leadership on the defense. And no matter where Laurinaitis is at the top of his game or he's struggling because of injury, he is a leader. He's going to be a leader on that defense. Let's head back to the phone lines. Let's go to Chalmette and David. David, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, David.
Hi, guys. You guys are doing a tremendous job.
Why don't you turn the TV down and give us your question,
guys.
please? Go ahead. Okay, we'll only put him on hold. We'll try to go to Jeffrey on the West Bank. Hey, Jeffrey, welcome.
How you doing?
Good, Jeffrey. How are you?
I'm fine. I watched a pretty good horse race almost 2 weeks ago over there, Fairgrounds, in Louisiana Derby. And I wanted to know, because I don't believe you talked about it yet on your television show. I wanted to know what you thought about the race and the chances for a Louisiana horse to win the Kentucky Derby, in particular, gun runner another Benson horse.
Right. Well, again, we don't cover horse racing a lot, but it is a huge sport here in New Orleans and Louisiana. And the Benson's got a pretty good chance here at maybe getting at least a Kentucky Derby winner. With 2 horses in there, it's almost unheard of. I had Jeff Duncan on the program today, obviously a Louisville native, knows a lot about the Derby, and he seems to be very excited about the prospects of the Bensons maybe coming in with a Derby winner.
Yeah, I wish Catherine Terrell was on the show today because
she could knock it out.
Is her thing.
Yes.
But from what I understand, in the race, it was, I didn't know that. I'm not familiar with horse racing at all, but the way that the owner just unloaded on the jockey and blamed him for not winning it, I thought that was pretty incredible.
Yeah, it was again, that was almost unheard of to have a trainer dress down a jockey like that. But from what I understand, this jockey is he's a guy that's been at Churchill Downs, ran a lot of horses, rode a lot of horses at Churchill Downs. So that might be one of the reasons why they're keeping him on. Anything you can add, or should we go to David?
I can't add anything.
Let's go back to David, see if we can get David on the line. David, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I think you guys are doing an incredible job, but you have to realize that the team's strength will always be the defense, and the center core of that defense is the LBs, and it starts with the coach, Joe Vitt, getting these guys to become the Dawn Patrol task. They have excellent linebackers on the team now, and that's the key. Don't worry about the offense. It's the defense. You build that Saints defense, you will win numerous Super Bowls.
David, thank you for the phone call. I think that is the feeling among most Saints fans, that as great as the offense has been in the past, no matter what, if Breeze is behind center, they're going to have a fighting chance to be able to win, but they've got to do something defensively. That's why when we're going to talk about the draft next, when I look at the draft, to me, I mean, maybe you might have to come out maybe the first 4 picks with 3 defenders, in my opinion, to justify having a great draft coming up because of the depth of the defensive line, the depth of the talent on defense, and the needs of the Saints right now.
Well, I think to me, it's the last couple of years have been kind of a missed opportunity because you're at the end, or not the tail end necessarily, but the general end of a Hall of Fame elite quarterback's career. He's putting out a #1 offense, doing what he's done his entire career with the Saints. And really, if they had an average defense or even a slightly below average defense, they're a playoff team these last couple of years.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's not as easy as saying that, but the defense doesn't have to be top 5. They just have to be adequate. They just have to be not the worst in the league.
Yes.
And you've got a league-leading offense that can really that can win a lot of games for you. So I think that's both the frustration of the last couple of years and maybe the hope for next year is that the offense has been consistent. The offense has always been there. It's just getting the defense to take some steps forward.
And when the Saints went to the Super Bowl, they were a pretty good defense, but they were an opportunistic defense. Right. I mean, again, and if you remember, Greg Williams covered up a lot of the holes on that defense. I said he was doing it with mirrors at times. I mean, masking the deficiencies, and a lot of those deficiencies were masked because they were so opportunistic.
Well, there's really 2 ways that you can go defensively. You can be what the Broncos were last year, where you can shut people out, or you can be what the Saints were, what the Packers defense the next year was, and be the kind that can make key stops and key takeaways and kind of flip the momentum of games.
Yes.
And the Saints' best hope, it's going to be hard for them to go from last in the league to the top 5 and be what the Broncos were last year. So the Saints' best hope if they really want to contend and get to where they want to go, they're going to need to have the kind of defense that's opportunistic, takes plays away, makes plays at key times.
I will say this, and I've talked about it on this show, on the radio show, quite a bit. Evan, from what we saw a few years ago to now, the speed on the defense has increased. They've got athletic players where, at one time, using the Louisiana Derby reference, they were plodding horses. I mean, there was a time 2 years ago where I'm watching the linebackers run, and I think I'm still watching them run at this point. So they've upgraded the speed on the defense. You can see that with some of the young players that they brought in.
Well, and I think that's, if you've got some maybe optimism for next year, it's not only these free agent acquisitions, but it's also the guys they drafted last year making a step from year one to year two. And that's Stephon Anthony, that's Kikaha, even in the interior line, Tyler Davison. And you know, maybe some of the undrafted guys, Bobby Richardson may not have the same role that he had a year ago, but maybe as a role player he finds a niche. So I think to improve on defense, you're looking at the whole package. You're looking at free agents, you're looking at the draft, and you're also looking at year one to year two guys making a jump.
Yeah, and you had a redshirt years for Tull and for P.J. Williams,
who
and
I
both
forget,
of those guys have been in the system now for a year, so you're hoping that they're going to be able to come in and hit the ground running, where they won't be swimming like a lot of rookies are when they first come to camp. Your thoughts on the defensive side of the ball?
The rookies making a jump to the second year, there's so much pressure put on, especially high first and second round picks, to be exactly who they're going to be in the first year. But if you think about a guy like Cam Jordan, Cam Jordan had 2 sacks his first year, was playing a different role, was a lot heavier, trying to play the run, and then once he had a year in him, he kind of became the Cam Jordan that the Saints are used to. That's true for a lot of guys around the league. Even J.J. Watt had a 4 or 6 or something like that sack year his first year in the league. So there's the possibility of those guys making a jump. And I think the other thing is you gotta put the 2 drafts together. You gotta have last year's draft where they added some talent, and you gotta add some more talent to it. Because really you build defenses through the draft. It's gonna be hard to buy a defense in free agency, even though some teams tried this year. But you're gonna have to, like if you look at the Broncos this year got a lot of credit for the 3 free agent signings they made when they got Ware and Talib and Ward, but the rest of that defense was all drafted, and then they used free agency to plug the holes. That's kind of the way you have to build.
No, I agree with that, and you know the problem with that is you got an aging quarterback, there's a window closing, and you're trying to put this young defense on the field. You hope that they're going to be coinciding, you know, that you can have a defense down the line that can maybe carry this team, so you're not putting so much pressure on Breeze as he hits the twilight of his career. Talk about the draft, the strength of the draft in your opinion, and where you think the Saints may go.
Well, I think, you know, like I said 3 or 4 weeks ago, I would have thought it ridiculous that they would do anything other than defensive side of the ball with that first pick. Now, I still think they should go on defense, but I wouldn't be as shocked if they use some of the early picks on some other parts, maybe some wants rather than must-haves. I still like going with a defensive end, outside linebacker, edge rusher, maybe somebody that can work on the other side of the line with Cam Jordan and kind of make that a more dynamic side of the ball and rush the passer a bit more. I like, you know, going after some guy like Sua Cravens, who was in recently. You know, maybe he's kind of intriguing as that second pick because he's one of those players you can plug in the nickel and just, you know, almost overnight make your nickel package a little bit more interesting. Yes. In a perfect world, you get a guy who can play a role immediately and then maybe a year later come into an every down role as these guys leave for free agency or they kind of age out, like Jarris Bird, somebody like that. So if you can do both those things, I think that makes it the perfect pick.
Can you add, Joe? What are you looking at this draft? Strength of the draft and then direction where the Saints may go in your opinion?
Strength of the draft is clearly the front 7 on defense, which is good for the Saints. They've got, a lot of people are calling this the deepest defensive tackle draft they've seen in who knows how long.
Which is a huge need, right?
Huge. In fact, I would say, for me, I think the 2 positions I'd want most for the Saints are a 3-technique tackle who can rush the passer. It's not something they had last year. They didn't get much push up the middle. And they've got some guys on the edge. They've got some young guys on the edge in Hauli Kakaha and Kasim Edebali and Aboom Gwacham who give you some young options there. If you watch Denver's pass rush, especially in the Super Bowl, what they are able to do is they've got those guys coming off the edge, but they're also getting push up the middle, and the quarterback doesn't have anywhere to go. So many times last year, the Saints would get one rusher free. There'd be all these escape routes because they weren't getting rushed at other places, and they'd have the quarterback have a chance to get up and move around. So defensive tackle, and then the other thing is somebody who can cover consistently at that weak side linebacker position. If it has to be a safety who plays that role like they've done in Arizona and St. Louis, that's fine. But somebody who can handle running backs, handle tight ends, because they were the worst in the league at covering both last year.
Yeah. Send back to the phone lines. Ed's in Kenner. Ed, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. How you doing, Ed?
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for calling.
They were mentioning Browner. He had said that he was hurt last year, and that that's the reason why he was falling behind and all that. And I wanted to ask a second question too. I don't know if anybody had heard anything maybe about Keenan
Do you guys buy into Browner? I mean, we talked about it a little bit in the break. He did have the MCL injury during camp. I think it's kind of an excuse at this point. I think his skills are diminishing. I think he'd probably like to play in the league again, maybe throwing that out there. What are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah,
Evan?
I mean, there may be a grain of truth to it. I don't think he made it up entirely. But the fact is he's an aging cornerback who's coming off a terrible year, and he's unemployed right now. And I think you have to look at it in that context.
He was never a guy that you could leave in one-on-one without help. He was always a guy in New England and Seattle that always had somebody over him and was playing as a second cornerback with somebody that you could leave on an island. And the thing was, the Saints had Delvin Breaux, and they could leave Delvin Breaux, but they unless they put a safety over the top, he wasn't able to do it. And that's not something that you would have expected healthy given his previous.
Right. And it really nullified Bird because they had to play Bird over the top a lot. I mean, it nullified his ability to make plays, be a playmaker. And look, you know, to me, when you look at him, the Saints didn't do him any favors in terms of how they utilized him as well. You knew what he was. He was a bump and run corner. You knew he was going to grab, hold. That was what he did. And they just didn't have the help to be able to really kind of give him a real shot. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are glad that Browner has moved on at this point. Ed, you have one final question?
Yes, sir. Has anybody heard anything about Keenan Lewis's injury? Hang up. Thank you
for the phone call, guys. I know he's rehabbing. You know he's a guy that's going to work hard. Your thoughts? Anything you could give us?
I don't have anything specific other than I think he's fully expecting to be 100% full go come this season. And I mean, the way he talks, he feels like he has a lot to prove, and I think he's certainly looking forward to it.
He's put plenty of shots of him rehabbing on Instagram, so you know he's doing it. The thing was, the biggest problem with his injury last year was he kept trying to come back, and it couldn't quite get there. He's had a full off season now where he hasn't had to force it. So I think with the tissue injury that it was, I think he's probably had time to get healthy. First and second round picks for the Saints as we stand here today. What are your thoughts? Can you throw some players out there? It all depends on who's available. But there's Shaq Lawson, Sheldon Rankins, really everybody that you know. But it's hard for me to make a guess without knowing how the thing falls. Right. Evan? I'm going to have my mock draft on NOLA.com tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. But I've got Shaq Lawson as my number one. And like I said, it depends how those first 11 picks fall, and there are any number of scenarios. But I think the Saints are in an okay spot. I think there are going to be enough options for them at 12 that they can get a good choice. Yeah, so do I. Evan Woodbery of NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune, Joel Erickson of The Advocate, thanks so much for being on our panel tonight. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE at 10 p.m. and also statewide on Pelican Sports Television at 9 o'clock on Friday night. You can catch me on the radio, 990 a.m. WGSO, weekdays, 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. Also on the TuneIn Radio app, which is a free download for your smartphone or your tablet, and at ericasher.com, where you can listen live, download the podcast. Also, every previous episode of the award-winning Inside New Orleans Sports can be seen at ericasher.com as well. Again, special thanks to our guests, Evan Woodbery and Joel Erickson, also to the WLAE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Kenny Juneau, Philip Williamson, Naila Jones, and my director, William Hill. New Orleans, have a great week. We'll see you right back here next Thursday night for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. Thanks for watching.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.